Hi, this is Dr. Sora Dubitsky, and I'm here with my friend Caro. And I've been teaching sex ed for 19 years, so I've been watching, all these changes take place.
My name is Gato, and I'm currently a student at Florida International University, and I'm studying psychology, which is where I got to meet the lovely Dr. Sora. I took a class with her almost about a year ago, and that is where I learned more about the psychology behind sexual behavior. And today we wanted to cover how Gen Z carries their romantic intentions, attachment styles, different ways that you can express yourself in romance in today's modern day. Because as Sora was telling us, there's different styles and different patterns of things that change throughout the years based on social setting and the way that you were brought up, you know. We can always go back to nature and nurture and debate on where our personality took us from, which overall, I feel like our personality is what carries us into how we express ourselves romantically.
So the whole idea of relationship or even romance and relationship is a fairly new idea. Didn't really get started until like the 1500s. My experience with students the past few years is that nobody wants to get married anymore. So, which is why I'm interested in this idea of romance. So, if you're not going to get married, what is your relationship going to look like? And I'll say for years, relationships were about lineage, passing on your name to the next generation. It was about transfer of properties. It was to stable communities. It was to make sure you had children, maintain alliances. There are familial reasons why people have relationships they have. So, being attachment to your primary caregiver, and that attachment to your primary caregiver becomes the basis of attachments in adult relationships.
You had mentioned that earlier on there were three attachment styles, which the first one would be secure attachment, in which I see the signs of this a lot in my generation being avoiding toxic relationship styles, prioritizing emotional intelligence, and valuing consistency over intensity, which basically just goes back to, wanting that security, wanting to be reassured, having almost like an abandonment like fear. And the people with secure attachment styles are more likely to want long-term partnerships, which is kind of opposite to what you had said earlier, which is that a lot of people in Gen Z don't really want to get married, don't want that commitment.
Every term for almost 20 years now, I ask the question, what five things need to be in place before you have children? And I get answers like what you're describing, secure partnership, consistent, committed partnership, committed relationship. But nobody uses the word marriage. So how does marriage fit into what you're saying, or does it? And can you have a long-term relationship, till death do us part is, one of the vows I took. Can you have that without being legally married?
So I would say that my perspective is yes, you can have a long-term relationship without putting the label of being married. I think that a lot of the times I look back on it as in something related to my life as well because my parents are divorced. And I think that there's a large portion of my generation which has divorced parents and has seen people get divorced. And just overall seeing of how big of a commitment marriage is and just seeing how it breaks, out of nowhere and how the government has involved itself in marriage and seeing how unserious marriage is now that everyone's getting divorced. I think a lot of my generation doesn't see a reason to get married because if it's just signing papers and calling, your partner a wife or a husband rather than a boyfriend or girlfriend, then why do it, That's the way I see it. Like I've also met people who have been engaged for many years and they never actually get married or they're just together, and they live their own separate lives, their separate homes. But every once in a while, they go out for dinner, they have talks. Overall, it's your decision and based on your attachment, which I was gonna mention the anxious attachment and avoidant attachment styles, which are a little more commonly seen in my generation. So for anxious attachment, I would say the common patterns would be seeking labels for security, and just overall like feeling anxious about not knowing whether or not the text that they sent was good enough, or if they send too many mixed signals at once, or if they're receiving mixed signals. It's overall the attachment style for overthinkers. Another common pattern that I see from this is staying in unstable relationships. This could be based on fear of, just not finding anyone afterwards, or not being able to find someone that's good enough for your standards. And then also just difficulty within casual dating despite participating in it. Because someone who is anxious may want to eliminate, that feeling of horniness maybe. And they just, we're like, oh, okay, this person wants to have casual sex, let's do that. But then later on, they're like, shit, I shouldn't have done that because now I feel attached to them, or I've grown some sort of attachment because we had sex. And then with the last attachment style, which is avoidant attachment, I would say that this is often linked to situationships, arranging yourself with friends with benefits. Someone that's avoidant is more likely to focus more on themselves, growing as a person independently, and putting aside a relationship, but still wanting those little moments of connection without losing themselves. I think that's the best way to put it. So these type of people will avoid emotional burnout, prioritize their mental health, and just stay wanting casual things, one night stands, friends with benefits, things that are, easy, not committed at all. So quite literally the opposite of what secure attachment would be.
What I've seen over the years, the attachment style, so it's secure, anxious, ambivalent, and avoidant. The one that's grown the most is avoidant attachment style. So I get the impression Gen Z wants to avoid relationships. And I do question. So there's a therapist named Esther Perel. She's on YouTube. She's very famous. She's written a couple of books probably. And her whole premise is that human beings have two drives. One is the drive for security, and the other is the drive for novelty. And you put those into a relationship, she uses it to explain and in a way excuse, why people have affairs, because they like, novelty. And yet they want, that home base, and yet they want to be married or be in a secure relationship. What I'm thinking, I don't want this to really necessarily be a commercial, for get married. But there is something to that legal piece of paper that makes it difficult. I've been married twice, divorced the first time, and second time my husband died. So one time it was volitional, another time it was not quite volitional, but that was 7 years ago. But the second time we were married for 37 years. There were advantages. I mean, you talked about government, there were advantages to be married, especially for tax breaks. Couples got paid less taxes than individuals. I don't know if most, but the articles talk about a lot of your generation. They're getting tired of what's called situationships. They're getting tired of hookups, that they really want more connection. They really want love and more depth and more connection. Is that what people are looking for? People your age are looking for, that depth. And then how are you finding it?
So I would say that there's a mix, just because we're all part of one generation, that doesn't mean that we all want the same things, as much as we do have similarities, like how you were mentioning the avoidant attachment. I see that as much as I see that in myself, I see that in a lot of my friends and a lot of my peers. I think that the way to find it is definitely naturally. If you want to find anything with real connection, I would steer away from any dating apps unless you're just trying to find something quick, like a casual hookup. Nonetheless, I see that a lot of long-term deep relationships are usually because, a friend introduced a friend to another friend, and those friends happens to like each other's qualities, like each other's company, and that's how things happen naturally. Unfortunately, that's something that, we can't just ask for and get right away. It's not something you can buy. It's not something like, drugs that can just give you that instant fix that you always want. It's something that you have to wait for. And also, you can definitely try and look, go to different places, find hobbies that pique your interest. And then once you go do those hobbies, you meet people who also like those hobbies. And then just overall meeting people is how you eventually find love. But overall, I think that there's a large mix of people, in my generation who are between wanting a connection and wanting a deep relationship versus people who are okay with just, quick fixes of casual sex here and there every 2, 3 weeks, oh, I'll just go on Grindr or Hinge or Bumble and see, who's down to have sex tonight. So it's a variation of people, a variety of wants and needs. But yes, overall, I would say if you want to meet someone naturally, find an interest. Just surround yourself with people because meeting people is the number one way to find love, in my opinion.
Okay, because that would be advice I would give to someone. Exactly. And I know people go on dating apps. I have one friend here where I live. It's like her hobby.
Yeah,
She's always swiping and she's met a lot of people, but none of them are the one. And what I've read, it takes like women, complain that something else women are starting to get out of, or, with the research, is that women are starting to get out of the dating app, not business, they're not using them as much. And for every one person you do meet through a dating app, you get swiping fatigue. There's so much, they're swiping like thousands of swipes. Maybe that's an exaggeration, hundreds of swipes. And until, you meet someone. If somebody were asking me for relationship advice, which they do sometimes, I would say exactly what you just said. Go do what you enjoy doing, have a circle of friends, meet someone with the same interests as you, because that's, I call myself a sapiosexual, which means I fall in love with brains. Smart is sexy to me. I mean, not that I'm in the market for anyone now at all, but smart is sexy. And my second husband, he's like the smartest person in the world. We had the greatest conversations in the world. That we had similar interests. We were both involved with this discipline I talk about, A Course in Miracles. And that's what I fell in love with. I mean, he was 22 years older than me. I didn't think at first I could even love someone. We became friends. We had so much fun together. And then after a few months of hanging out, like, wow, I love this person. But it was exactly what you said. We had the shared interest. There's a sense of, yeah, you want the partner, you want the consistency, you use that word.
yeah,
You want the love, but you also want to be allowed to grow in your own way.
definitely. That's what I have thought about for the longest time because I think I've mentioned before, like I've only been in one relationship. Seriously, like it was back in high school, it was about 3 years long. And in that relationship, I realized that I was, growing as an individual for sure, because, it was like from 15 to 18 years old. I grew as an individual, but I noticed that after that relationship ended, I feel like there was a large amount of growth that happened after that. Not solely because, I was leaving a habit that I had been part of for such a long time, but because I was finally able to focus on myself and my individuality
Mm,
and the people that I surrounded myself with, like friends and family. Because when I was in that relationship, I felt like all of my time and energy went towards the relationship. And of course, it's not something that I can necessarily say I regret or I want to go back and change things because, everything happens for a reason. And every experience that you gain is valuable because it helps you learn and, put things out of perspective. Um, but overall, I would say that my individuality isn't something that I prioritize in that relationship, which is something that I would take with me into the next relationship. Just because, I am someone who has a job. I have this podcast, which is really important to me. It's hard. It is hard to make time for all these things, but it's necessary because those things make you feel happy and they make you grow and you only have one life, so you have to live
Mhm.
as best as you possibly can. That's my motto.
The idea of a trad wife, and I asked you like how, are any of your friends um, following, that influence? Because there's influencers now talking about women, don't go to college, don't try to improve yourself, just find a man and let him take care of you. My generation, I think, is to blame, for a lot of, the divorces, because women, once the birth control was introduced, and a birth control pill was introduced, and women had access to permanent, stable, reliable birth control. It gave them license to really work outside the home. They could pick and choose when they wanted to have children.
Right.
And that led to a lot of divorces because all of a sudden women were independent. And that idea of depending on a man as opposed to equal partnership, which is what I've had in, well, my last marriage, it was an equal partnership. The wind beneath each other's wings, we lifted each other up. That was the purpose of that relationship. In the trad wife movement, it seems like a throwback to the 1950s when women were very unhappy. Is that going to be the future of Gen Z relationships?
There's a lot of thoughts on that subject. To answer your most recent question, I do not think that's going to be a large part of Gen Z in the future, because a lot of us are like still in the school era of life, where you're still like in your 20s or, you're in your late
Mhm.
and you're still like figuring yourself out. But in the
Yeah,
future,
and I think that's great, by the way, that women have had a chance to figure themselves out before committing
yes,
to it being in a partnership.
I would say it's not a large part of Gen Z that really wants to follow the trad wife movement. But what I
Mhm.
would say is, yes, like I do have a friend who I have in mind, who would follow the trad wife movement. But I think a lot of the time when regarding to the trad wife movement, instead of seeing it as, I want to stay home and take care of children while my husband works, it's more of, at least in my friend's case, she's told me multiple times that she just doesn't like working. Since we are so used to having things at our hands and given to us so quickly,
Mhm.
like related to dopamine, like on social media, like how you're just swiping and swiping and swiping and like, or you want a drug, you have it. Like we just have things at our hands very quickly. And so a lot of the time I see that some people in my generation don't want to work. Like they're just really lazy. So in my friend's case, I would say that because she doesn't like working, and she currently has three jobs, just to sustain the lifestyle that she wants. She's told me many times that like she studied, she has her degree in education, she's teaching and she's also working. She does that so that she could sustain that life for herself. But in the long term, she would like for someone to work and provide that money for her while she stays at home, takes care of the children that she may have. She just finds it more convenient for her based on what she wants, which is to not work. So what she offers is a wife who will take care of her children and take care of the home, the food, the cleaning, whatever that needs to be done, which at the end of the day, that still is work. But I guess
Mhm.
it's the type of labor that she's opposed to doing. So a lot of the time I see that some people will talk about the convenience of not working as a woman. Like I think also my brother's ex would tell me about how she preferred that ideology of her future. But I personally don't like the idea of it. I think that my life would look more put together if me and my future partner took turns within who's gonna cook dinner for tonight, or who's gonna clean the house on Sunday, or who's gonna get the groceries on Tuesday.
Mhm.
Because instead of just having one person assigned to doing one thing over and over and over again, I feel like I would get tired of doing that. Rather than when you're in a relationship where things are equal and you're both working jobs, even if they're both 9 to 5 or if they're different hours, maybe someone's working from 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. and the other is working from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m. You guys find time for each other and to be able to take care of the home that you live in together, or if you live in separate homes. So it's really all about adaptation and what is more convenient for your lifestyle.
What
Yes.
about love? That feeling of love, dopamine driven. Love is an addiction. It is something that I experienced more so, with my first husband. I was younger, so I was only about 20 when I met him. Yeah, I was your age. I think I was 19 when I met him. That burning desire, you want to see them, you can't live without them. And that does change over the course of a relationship. But it's like something that spurs someone into relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and emotional intimacy and desire and wanting to be with someone. Does that figure, like the woman you're describing, does that figure into her equation of finding somebody? Is this going to be somebody who's just rich, or is this going to be someone that she's actually in love with?
I think in that
Um,
case, it would be nice to find someone that she's in love with, as well as someone who's willing to provide for her financially. But realistically, it just depends on how badly you want something. Because if, let's say you know, someone looking for someone that is financially stable enough to take care of me, the person in itself, and our children if we want to have any. And that department is completely, checked off, like check that box. But I don't feel 100%, that connection, that attachment with them. Maybe I can just tell myself, oh, we'll live together. Eventually it'll grow. Eventually I'll feel in love, but for now, this is ideal for me because that person can provide for me. So it's all about really your priorities and what you want more out of in a relationship. Like I think that I would prioritize a connection with someone much more than ever, wanting someone's bank information.
sorry.
It's very individual.
That was very funny. Do you find yourself looking for love?
Yes, but as I said beforehand, if you want to naturally find a connection, which is
Okay,
currently
right.
what I am looking for per se, it's important to just, meet people and put yourself in situations where you can find new people who have common interests just like you, similar to how you met your previous husband.
You think in terms of love, you're attracted to someone physically. I was never really attracted to him physically. I fell in love with his brains.
Right.
Mhm. So that was my love story.
It's
Keep
all
going.
about finding someone who impresses you in the way of how you connect with that person. And in your sense, it was because you could have conversation with him about many things that you felt like you couldn't converse with other people. So that's the
Hmm.
type of connection that people look for that isn't seen too much because we're all just focused on swiping and swiping and swiping and swiping.
What was really important in that relationship?
Mhm.
We laughed. I, being able to share a joke, being able to make each other laugh. That was to me one of the glues that kept that relationship together. And it just, not taking, you can come home and find like respite from the storm outside, but you can also laugh together. And I thought that was in retrospect, thinking about it, that was one of the most important things that kept us together in that relationship. If you like these conversations, I think they're very meaningful conversations. We live in transitional times, sharing what we think about this, and there's data and research and science, which is important, but personal experience is also really, really important. I have a column on Substack called Eros and Essence, Sexual and Spiritual Wholeness. I'm also doing a Course in Miracles online on Tuesdays from 2:30 to 3:30. So you can contact me at saradubitsky@gmail.com.
And if you have any questions for us about any sort of
Please
content that you would like to
comment
hear, you can leave a comment below about anything that you'd like to hear us talk about.
and please subscribe and share.
Yep. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.